Aho, this is a member of the Voice of Reason. I'm coming at you, and today I'm going to be discussing the fallacies of every major film studio in America, and which will be their inevitable downfall, either by financial design and economic backlash, or by simply the government intervening and saying no more. Mainly because they hire actors for all the wrong reasons, and they're overly funded, and basically the country is now starting to recognize how much money each of these studios spent on making major motion pictures, and how much debt our military is in. So, let's get started, shall we? First off, your average movie of these studios costs $20 to $30 million, which means basically 30 million is the bare minimum. Usually it's 100 million, and then the numbers go up and up and up and up. What they spend to make a movie could easily feed millions of hungry people around America for about 5 years straight. The problem with this is that because it's such the privatized major motion picture industry is so privatized and exclusive, only the select few actually get fair opportunity or even get a chance to sit there and make the studios money. This system doesn't clearly works for the most part, but in the long run it's going to hurt it because millions and millions of people around the country who have more talent are not getting in. Because of this practice, actors usually demand more and more, higher and higher of a salary to get paid up front just to act in a film. Then there's the royalty fees that continue afterwards. The royalty fees make a lot of sense, but them overcharging the studios pretty much more and more money just to agree to sign on to act in a film is actually absurd and ridiculous. Granted, there's thousands, hundreds and hundreds of other people who work on a movie, everything from the props guy, the producers, the list goes on. They need to get paid too, and that makes sense. However, the fact of the matter is that 90% of the cost of a movie usually goes toward paying the actors just to make the movie. At the rate they're going, eventually they're going to be tapped out of money, and the more and more our government falls apart, their ability to basically roam free in the way they do things is going to be slipping more and more away. Hence, the movie industry, which has left this blanket of illusion, will cease to exist. See, because the exclusivity of the movie industry, of these major motion pictures, of these major film studios, a lot of the times your average American is so glued to what they want to see, and so glued to every single movie that comes out, and so glued to living into this junk food and brain candy that's so readily available and fed to the public, that eventually in due time they hold no other interest in every other aspect of our culture. It's sad to say, but one of the sad evident truths is people know more about what's going on with these major film studios than they do know what's going on CNN, which readily documents what's going on with the news today, or C-SPAN, which is direct feed into the House of Representatives, everything that Congress does to monitor our lives. Both Yale and UCLA did a consensus, and they came to the disturbing realization that your average American today knows more about these movie studios than they do know what's going on in the White House. One of the main sad reasons they said was that your average American simply had no interest in watching C-SPAN or CNN or taking any interest in politics whatsoever. This is a major fallacy which has hurt our country as a whole, and which is one of the leading causes as to why Donald Trump inevitably became president. In fact, Donald Trump openly admitted it's the same level of ignorance that the average American shows no interest in politics whatsoever he used to his advantage to win the election. He told the American public everything they wanted to hear, everything showed them what they wanted to see, and expected them to not know any better. Well, your average American who took no interest clearly bought into his crap. See, this is the same problem that's been going on for year after year. In fact, most documentary filmmakers have pointed out this very fact as well. Donald Trump basically used America's own lack of interest in politics to advance his way into the White House, thus leaving us further and further down the path of destruction which he seems to be hell-bent on leading us. It's evident that this is an ongoing problem which is now biting us in the ass. Because of the exclusivity and high-priced nature of the movie industry, the glitz and glamour and the allure and the fact that the American public is more interested in what these studios put out than they are interested in what's going on in the White House. It has been the very thing that has hurt our country on an epic scale. Why is this? Because the politicians would rather us take interest in this than them. The ultimate lie we bought into is that we assume that they don't want us taking interest in these. Politicians would rather us be more distracted and focused on these major film studios seen in this photograph than they would us actually paying attention to what's going on in the White House or in Congress. What does that do for them? It gives them free and enough space to make sure that only the lucky 10% of Americans are paying attention, as opposed to 100% of Americans paying attention. Because if 100% of Americans actually paying attention more to what's going on in the White House than what's going on with these major film studios, things would be a lot different. This is the kind of culture that has been built for us. Year in and year out, our minds were programmed and built to buy into movies, a fantasy world, so we do not focus on the major reality of what's going on around us. This will be inevitably our downfall also. See, if we keep on paying attention, we the average American people keep on paying more attention to major film studios than we do what's going on in the White House, this is inevitably going to lead to war, famine, the environment screwing up even further, or something major, some major catastrophe which could hurt everybody on the planet as a whole. This level of ignorance has to come to an abrupt end, and the movie industry needs to change its practice. See, because the movie industry, for the most part, is a private sector, there's a lot of things they can get away with that a public sector simply cannot get away with, or the non-profit sector cannot get away with. It's also which leads to a lot of the abundant problems which face Hollywood today, which have been going on for years. For instance, your Hollywood sex scandals. Wow, oh how the money have fallen. Here's the thing, with the private sector, they can get away with a lot more. They don't have to answer to public officials or politicians or various people like that. Their funding is privatized entirely, so they're given a lot more leeway. Here's the other downside to the private sector. Celebrities make a lot of bank, and pretty much movie actors in particular. It gives them a lot more money to play around with, and they'll make a lot more bad life choices. If they're given a more tempered salary or a lot less money to work with, or are forced to live more frugally, major spending and major messes which would not be occurring time and time again. Besides, who needs a house this big? Here's another one, drug-related deaths, another downside to the privatized sector of the movie industry. The University of Boston actually did a study, and they said the amount of actors between the years of 1962 and now pretty much have claimed more lives than the entire body count of the Vietnam War. Yuck. Which means more celebrities in America have died than more soldiers that died in Vietnam. Yeah, that one I can't stomach actually. Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm going to barf, I think. Anyway, let's move on. If this practice goes unchecked and unstopped, this is, I mean, everything that the studio has done, everything in its privatized sector and its major fallacies in the way they do things, everything from the overpriced salaries to the drug overdoses, and the celebrity-related deaths, and politicians who should not be in public office making life miserable, will eventually lead to an outraged public. One thing's for sure, that history has shown us that once you get an angry public, pretty much outraged, there is no calming them down. The only real way to calm them down is to give them what they want and to satisfy their anger and to appease it, just so it'll go away. To do this, they would have to pass stricter laws and have some judge sit there and agree and to go along with whatever the American public wants, and that might not be in the best interest of democracy or the people in it at all. But what the few and what the few members of the public and what the many want differ entirely. Sometimes, pretty much an angry mob of people who want to see a major problem go away is nothing more than them trying to kill their own pain. It's not really a solution to what's going on around them. And the problems that face the movie industry are no different. Don't fret. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a viable solution to all these problems. But what we have to do will take a while to get there. We turn to the public sector. Public sector has compromised of firms owned by the government, often aim to provide a service, and often a key industry. Basically, it's a lot more fair and a lot more accessible for people with genuine talent and who have an honest desire to do what they love. Which means those working in the public sector are financially comfortable. They don't need to be rich, and they have a fixed income. Their fixed income doesn't go above a certain level, and they're okay with that. But they're working a decent job, and they're happy. See, a set income is a certain salary set up before you, where you're not going to be rich, you're not going to be poor, but that's your gross annual income per year. Which means that, buying yachts and mansions and things of that nature, or having a disposable income to where you could sit there and spend money on drugs, is just simply not there. You see, a public-owned movie lot would sit there and provide healthy competition for the private sector, but what it would also do is create a lot more jobs. Unlike the private sector, where they could sit there and cast anybody and everybody they want, a public-owned studio would sit there and be forced to sit there and hire people on talent and talent alone. You would have to sit there and answer to a certain set of strict rules. Not to mention your income would be a lot less than that of the private sector. However, you would be a lot better off, and you'd have a steady job. This would create a lot more equal opportunity in the movie industry as a whole. So, what kind of movies would come as a direct result of the public sector? We have the major blockbusters which these film studios put out there currently right now. Probably not. However, there is a definite positive drawback that would come as a direct result. Due to lack of major funding, like these major film studios you see right in front of you, actors such as Samuel L. Jackson, who got his big break acting in Pulp Fiction, got by on talent and talent alone. Due to the fact there was no CGI or any effects, he got by on his performance, which is, by the way, phenomenal. Excuse me, let me clean that up. He got his big break acting in another movie, but his career majorly took off when he did Pulp Fiction. Like I said, he got by on his talent alone. In fact, a lot of people think he's the main focus of that. They say that because he stole the show over and over and over again. How did he do that? He got by on talent and talent alone, which is what the movie industry is lacking nowadays. How does one make this possible? You give in a state governor to tackle on the challenge of having a film studio owned by a state and a state alone. This could not only create major revenue for a state government, but it also could sit there and create a lot more jobs and create a much more fair practice in the movie industry. You have people who are just as famous as Samuel L. Jackson or other various people like him. The only difference is that with this particular practice, they would not be making as much money as other major film stars. Just as famous, just as big, but not as rich. Just not hilariously rich and overpaid. Not that that's a bad thing if you get by on talent, but there's only so much money that actors really need. And this particular practice would give actors what they need. The trade-off is a lot more people would be able to live their dream. Everybody from costume designers to cameramen to directors to actors, you name it. There would be plenty of jobs to go around in the public sector of the movie industry. The only question now is creating a public sector and finding a state governor ballsy enough to sit there and have such a practice. This, however, would financially rescue us in a lot of different ways. See the numbers on this page? This is a clear-cut sign that the movie industry is a billion-dollar industry that the public could be tapping into, but we're simply not taking the initiative to do so. The majority of the profits could go back into the federal budget, where we're no longer borrowing money from China to fund our military, and we're no longer sitting there putting ourselves in debt. Also, many different ways the movie industry could be cleaned up. It could have a much more positive aspect on the American public as a whole, as opposed to being an unhealthy tool to keep the American public distracted while the politicians sit there and toy with our lives, and at the same time, where the public suffer in the long run. So, what's the moral of the story? We, the public, need to reach out to our government and convince them to help us make this industry public and not all private. There has to be a public sector of the film industry, as well as a private sector. If there isn't, we will continue to have these problems. There will continue to be the dead bodies piling up and the amount of unhealthy distractions to keep our brains off the fact that our country is going to hell. This is AIM, member, the voice of reason. Aho!